Today I'm going to be spending some quality time with Studman. I just finished trimming up his feet and put some clay on his soles just to keep them nice and fresh under his shoes.
Hey girl.
Scarlett is spending the day in her stall. Well, not in her stall. She still hasn't come inside. She is pretty good friends with Studman. They did spend the winter in adjoining stalls, so maybe it'll coax her to come inside today. I've been waiting on a new set of shoes for Studman, but I'm just going to reset these old ones. This is, I think, the third or maybe fourth time I've reset them. I pulled his shoes off about 2 weeks ago and let his feet have kind of a rest. For anyone that's not familiar with Studman's story, he was a tiny bit foundered when I first got him. It has taken a really long time for me to get his feet looking normal again, but they're still not quite right. He tends to grow really flat, splatty feet, so he is really liking the addition of these glue-on shoes. The last video I did, you guys asked about getting thrush and fungus underneath the shoes, and this is the clay that I put on the bottom of their feet. It works pretty good and it fills in all the little holes that dirt may get into. With Studman looking very out of shape these days, it's important that I get him started so he can get some exercise. The new round bales that I got seem to be helping him tremendously. I've noticed that he is looking a little bit slimmer than he has been. The addition of some daily exercise will really help tip him over the edge, I think. Studman has always been a little bit weird about his feet. He does some odd things when I trim him. His feet were really in dire straits when I bought him, and it's been a little bit of a slow road getting him comfortable with me handling them. With his new shoes in place, I am going to put some padding underneath. This is just kind of like a gel. It will help so there's no rocks or mud or goo or anything that gets right up under the shoes, and it'll give his sole a little bit more protection. Before I do that, I am just re-gluing the outside of the shoes and filling in any holes that I may have missed. This is the hardest part of the whole deal for Studman. He does not like me being down here. I probably should have untied him. I do have two different types of pour-in pad that I'm going to be using today. One foot I'm going to put just the regular soft stuff, and the other foot is a product with copper sulfate in it that does help prevent thrush. Both of these tubes have about 1 foot left in them, so it'll be a good way to test to see which one stays in better. Typically when you do this, you put a little styrofoam pad on the bottom of the shoe and fill in the empty space, but I have to do it holding Studman's foot up. He still freaks out with stuff touching his feet, so this is the easiest way. It only takes about a minute to cure enough for me to put his foot down, but today he was really struggling. I was going to edit this part out, but I think it's important to see. I don't know if this horse has been laid down before, but this is kind of what they do when you tie their leg up. I was in a little bit of a precarious situation, so I just stayed calm and let him kind of figure it out himself. It's always important to keep a cool head when things don't quite go as planned, and luckily Studman just stood right back up and I could continue holding his foot up. Although Studman is a little bit braver than Pete and Goose, he does have a lot of things that he is pretty scared of for no reason other than maybe his previous handling. Studman acts to me like a horse that somebody tried to start and it didn't go quite as planned, so they decided to get rid of him. I didn't think it would take me this long to get his feet straightened out, but after 2 years I finally feel comfortable actually working him. This is what the regular clear, soft pour-in pad looks like.
You okay, buddy?
I do think Studman is a very smart horse, but something in his past has prevented him from being as outgoing as I would like one to be when I start their under saddle training. He also does have that really big scar on his back leg, and if you saw in our other video, he does have a broken tail. I don't know how he got it. So even though I don't know exactly what has happened to him, his injuries would lead me to believe that it wasn't a pleasant experience for him.
You okay?
I did a pretty sloppy job with the glue on the outside of these shoes, but it has to cure for a while before I clean it up.
Here.
The wind is really whipping around outside, kind of blowing a few things around, and it's getting Scarlett a little bit excitable. She hasn't tried to jump out of this fencing yet, but she does run into it to test to see how strong it is, so hopefully she'll stay contained. I really don't want Studman to think that he has to lay down, so I'm going to be extra nice to him while I'm filling up this foot. It's a little bit tricky because you do have to keep the foot pretty level for the pad to stay in place, and I don't want to pull his leg back because sometimes that will encourage them to lay down. It looks like this stuff with the copper sulfate in it does cure a little bit faster, so I'm going to keep that in mind for the future. These products are both around $20 a tube, so if the copper sulfate stuff sets faster, I'll probably start buying that from now on just for Studman. I found some low sugar treats for Studman, so I'm going to start using them a little bit more in his training.
What are you doing? What's wrong? Got food?
Scarlett always takes a little bit of time to settle down in the morning. She has alfalfa outside, and then she does have a hay net with grass hay hanging inside. Her domestication training is moving along quite nicely, even if she still doesn't quite respect the fences yet. Studman let me know what he thought about my little farrier session today. I will show you guys what that copper sulfate pad looks like. Depending on what the horse's foot looks like, these pads can plop out, so sometimes I do have to put a special netting in to help hold it in. The pads and the glue need to cure for a while, so I'm going to stick him in a stall, go clean out Scarlett's round pen, and then I'm going to get started on his training. These two really like each other, so hopefully she finds her way into her stall while I'm out doing chores. I don't have any plans to ride Scarlett anytime soon, but she may benefit from the same training that I will be doing with Studman today. I'm going to grab a handful of these tiny treats for Studman. They do say that they're low sugar, but they're actually not that great, so I might try and find some that are a little bit better for him. A lot of people just use regular alfalfa or grass hay cubes as treats, but Studman doesn't find them very enticing. This will be a good test for Scarlett. Hopefully, after trotting around for a little bit, she will settle down and continue to eat her breakfast. Studman's shoes are looking pretty good. If you guys caught my last video, I will be doing pretty much the same things that I did with Stewie with Studman. The only difference between these two boys is Studman has never had this stuff done to him. I have taught him how to flex each direction, but it's been quite a long time since I've actually worked him, so it's going to take a little bit of a refresher to remind him. I have found that a lot of these horses that get scared very early on in their training do get incredibly stiff. They're just waiting for something bad to happen to them usually. I'm going to continue doing these little stretches with him until he is pretty soft and supple and is able to bend his head all the way around to his shoulder without moving. One thing that I do not do with my horses that a lot of people see and do over and over and over again is disengage the hindquarters. For me, doing this with an already flighty horse that has a low fear threshold, I think just makes them worse. I think it is far more beneficial to teach these horses how to be lighter in their front end and keep their hind end engaged. I think if your main worry is about shutting your horse down when he starts bucking, maybe you need to go back and see where you can fix your training so your horse doesn't have a tendency to want to buck. My horses are still going to understand what a one rein stop is, but they will just do it without moving their body, which honestly is probably safer because when you pull their head around, they're not going to be wriggling like a fish. But there really are no rules when it comes to training horses, so you can really do it however you want. You guys may not have noticed this, but while I'm doing this with Studman, I'm actually teaching him how to ground tie or just stay in one place. I'm just continuing to go back and forth and ask him to flex on each side. I do like my horses to know that they are allowed to move their feet, so when I finally do get on them, it is not hard to get them going. So I do take them around in a little circle just to reset them every once in a while. Studman is doing really good at this, so now I'm just going to bend him around to each side, and I'm not going to give him any treats. I'm just going to give him a few little scratches. I want him to fully understand that he's not really following a treat to come around. He is following his nose and the pressure that is on it. I feel comfortable moving along to the next step with Studman. This is the very first time that I'm doing this with Studman, and he finds it a little bit surprising. He has no idea what the heck I'm doing jumping up and down. This is a pretty typical response that a horse will have that has never seen this before. I think this is the perfect exercise for a horse like Studman, who is maybe a little bit fractious around his training due to previous experiences. The jumping up and down motion is really scary for him, but there is literally no way that he could hurt himself in this environment with me just jumping around. When he starts showing me that he's accepting my bouncing a little bit more, I'm gonna just bounce around and have him follow me. I think this really helps the horses figure out that it's not a scary thing. It is a little weird, but they don't have to be afraid of me jumping up and down. After about 10 times of me doing this, he has settled down quite a bit. He still moves a little bit, so I'm just gonna continue to pull him forward, and then when he takes a few steps, I'm gonna stop. Since he was wriggling around quite a bit, I am just gonna go back to simply bending him around and getting him to stand still. Once he is back in a pretty calm state, I can go back to jumping up and down and seeing how much braver he is. I am going to bump it up a little notch and make sure that he will stand still while I'm right next to him jumping up and down. So I'm just going to wait for him to stop, and then I'll stop jumping. When I very first started training horses, I thought, like most people, that in order to do it well, you just had to be very good at sitting on bucking horses. Some horses you can start that way and it turns out all right, but I have found for these really sensitive, fearful horses, it usually does not end well. They tend to get way too overstimulated by all these things happening at once. They tend to get very scared and end up either hurting themselves or the person handling them, and then eventually they end up at a lower end sale like I found Studman at. It is pretty impressive when you can take a horse that hasn't been handled before and halter him, saddle him, and start riding him around in a day. But over the years, I have found that as I do it this way, the horses stay a lot more calm and quiet, and they're much more likely to be an active participant in their training. A horse that is encouraged to be curious instead of just obedient is a lot more fun to train in the long run. All of these individual steps do seem like a lot of overkill to most people, but they stack up on top of each other in a way that benefits the horse in the long run. While I'm getting Studman used to me jumping up and down next to him, I'm waiting for him to actually relax. He's doing all the things I asked, but his mind is still in kind of a frantic state. Since I do have my hands on him while I'm doing this, I can actually feel his back muscles tensing up when I start jumping up and down. And although he is able to tolerate me jumping up and down and he is flexing his head to the side, I am going to do it until he is actually relaxed. I think this is probably the most important part about training horses that a lot of people completely miss. While Studman had learned the task quite a while ago, it took him a lot longer to actually be relaxed in doing it. While I could have moved on before he was relaxed, I would definitely see it show up later in his training. A horse like Studman, who is already a little bit anxious about all of this work, would kind of hold it stored up in his body and then eventually he would just explode. I am basically looking for these horses to get very bored with what I'm doing and be relaxed all over their body before I move on to the next step. Studman is ready to move on to the next phase, but I am going to go back and make sure that he still understands all of the basics. Again, this is pretty common for him to be squirming around after I did some jumping up and down on him and I kind of walked around, so I need to reset him again. I go back up through all of the training that we just did, and this time I'm going to let him have his head straight while I jump up and down, and then I'm going to bend him around again. Instead of just tolerating my nonsense at this point, I am asking him to do a specific task while I'm jumping up and down. He is pretty unimpressed with me at this point, so I know he is ready to move on to the next task. I really like to break every single thing down into a tiny little step. Some horses don't care about this at all, but you can see as I started stepping up a little bit higher, Studman got a little excited about it. Once he calmed down, I know that I'm ready to get a little bit closer to him. I'm going to put all of the things together that he already learned and move on to the next thing. I want to make sure that he sees me out of both of his eyeballs before I jump on his back. I'm surprised he didn't mind that too much. Some horses, it really freaks him out, but I've basically been handling him on both sides of his body for 2 years. Once he's standing still and he doesn't seem to mind me flailing about is when I'll actually start to put my entire body weight on him. He did really good with that, so now I'm just going to start desensitizing him on his body. Of course, I'm not actually going to get on like this, but it is important for him to feel a human touching him all over when I get up on him. Some people will do this part by just jumping up and down on the horses, and although Studman is pretty short, I just prefer to use a mounting block of some sort. It helps them really figure out how to stand in one spot because they have a physical object to stand next to. It also really helps prevent accidentally pulling their back or their spine out of alignment. For a really fractious or sensitive horse, all of the extra energy from jumping up and down and then jumping on top of them, I think increases their fear a little bit. I was surprised Studman didn't wiggle around more than he did. This is pretty typical of a horse that has never had a human on top of them. I really want the horses to understand that even if they do get a little bit scared or anxious, they are absolutely welcome to stand still and figure it out. Studman doesn't seem to mind my high kicks too much. Once he is comfortable with me climbing up on him on both sides, having my feet right along his back, I am going to move on to the next step. I like to call this the horse jungle gym, and basically all I am doing is getting up on him on one side and then coming off the other side. Again, most horses will move when you pop out on their other side, but Studman doesn't seem to mind it at all. As I go along, I'll continue to move my body in a little bit different way and see how he reacts. I don't know if you guys noticed, but all I did differently there was let my legs dangle a little bit on each side, which horses usually find a little bit surprising. Since I know he's not quite comfortable with it, I will spend a little bit of extra time dangling my legs along his body just so he can feel it and accept that they are going to be doing that. Of course, I will go back and do it on both sides. This side is a little bit harder for me to get up, so it's a good thing that I am able to do it second when he's a little bit more calm. Studman also had a little bit trouble on this side when I started dangling my legs a little bit. Not a big deal, I'm just gonna pop off and I will go right back into doing it again, knowing this time that I'm gonna go a little bit slower and more deliberate. When he is finally more confident in that, I decide for today that was more than enough for us to end our session on. Before I put him away, however, I am going to go back through everything he just learned just to make sure he is still comfortable and confident in it. I'm really happy with how Studman did today. He had a little bit of a scare earlier when I was putting on his shoes. But even after learning some pretty scary things for him today, he was able to leave the round pen in a very calm and I think pretty happy state. It does look like there is a storm cloud coming. It has started to rain, so I'm going to go through and give this guy a good rub down. Because he was such a good boy today, I am just going to turn him back out into his pasture. Ziggy has access to the pasture, but he wanted to watch Studman in the round pen this whole time.
Zig! Hey, Zig.
I think the pasture time has really helped Ziggy. He is looking so much better. He has gained a lot of muscle mass, and I think he's really happy to have a few friends that don't pick on him too much. He did get a little bit of a nasty bite kind of along his withers, so he's had a little bit of a break the last couple of days while that heals. Ziggy is going to see the chiropractor in the next couple of days, so hopefully she'll give me some tips and exercises to do with Ziggy to get him a little bit more balanced. He is still a tiny bit stiff to one side and he's having just a little bit of trouble loping in that direction. It looks like his bite is healing up pretty good. It was very swollen the first day it happened. I think probably Studman just gave him a little bit of a nip. These boys are really good friends, but around feeding time, Studman still gets a little bit on the aggressive side. Ziggy has gained a lot
Boys.
of weight, but he still does need a bit more food than Studman and Gus. It looks like the storm is not huge. It'll probably sprinkle for maybe an hour, and then hopefully it'll be nice and sunshiny out again.
Stewie. Stu.
These three boys still keep separate from Goose and Whiplash most days. I have noticed that Whiplash has become really good buds with Stewie, so sometimes they hang out together.
Pete. Pete.
I know one of these days Pete is going to want to get pet too, but today isn't that day. Whiplash comes
Boy,
over
Whip.
for some scratches. I'm really happy that he's getting along with all of these other horses because it has been hard for him to get along with a big herd in the past.
Pete. Come on, Pete. Come on.
I think Pete wants to be involved in the snuggle session, but he's not quite
Goose.
brave enough to come over to the fence. And as per usual, Goose thinks that he is starving and he's got his head buried in the
Boys.
round bale remnants.
Come on, Pete. Come on, Pete. Pete.
I'm really glad you guys could come along with me today to see Studman do some initial training. I will be putting more videos out with him in it in the future, so if you're not subscribed, make sure to do that so you don't miss any. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.